IRS Form 8878. IRS e-files signature authorization for Form 4868 or Form 2350. So this is a tax form that you probably won't see unless you are using a paid tax preparer or some sort of tax preparation service besides yourself. So if you do your own tax returns, you'll probably never see this form. But under the IRS rules, this form and other similar e-file signature authorization forms allow you to delegate permission to your tax preparer to do certain things. So in this case, with Form 8878, you're giving your tax return preparer permission to file an extension of time to file for your U.S. income tax return. So that's on one of two forms, either 4868, which is the normal automatic extension of time for people based in the United States, that tax extension that takes you from the April 15th or thereabouts time frame, depending on the year, to October. And then Form 2350 is a form that you would request an extension if you're overseas and you expect to qualify for one of the provisions of the foreign earned income exclusion, whether you're excluding earned income, whether you're taking a foreign housing credit or a deduction. So you would use Form 2350 if your only reason for an extension is to meet one of the two the presence test, either the bona fide presence test or the actual presence test. Sorry, bona fide residence test of that particular country, or the presence test. So you would use Form 8878 to then give your tax return preparer permission to sign certain parts of those forms on your behalf. So we'll go over this. It's a brief form. It's one of those forms that you're probably just used to e-signing and you never actually read it, so we're going to break this down. At the very top of your form, you'll see your taxpayer name, social security number. If you're married filing jointly, you and your spouse will be entering your information, or your tax return preparer will have put this in here. The submission identification number field, known as SID, is a unique 20-digit letter number combination that specifically identifies each individual tax return. So the IRS uses it if they need to track down a specific return and for audit purposes. And then your tax return preparer is required to keep certain files in their records for up to 3 years after you filed your tax return. So just in case you were wondering, that's what this information field is. It specifically says that this is your income tax return and it's for reference purposes only. So in part one, you will be prompted to, your tax return preparer will probably walk you through this, but you'll check either box 1 or box 2, depending on which extension you're requesting. So our hero John Doe and his wife Jane, they're completing the 4868, so they're in the United States. And if you're paying additional money with your tax return, you would enter the amount that you're paying in line from line 7 of your 4868. If you use line 2, that extension of time, you'll enter the extension of time based on whatever the date is that would allow you to meet those tests on Form 2350, and then you would enter the amount that you're paying from line 5 of that form on line 2B. In part 2, each taxpayer, the taxpayer and the spouse, will make one of two selections. Either you check the first box, which means you authorize your tax return preparer to generate your PIN for you in the software and then they're going to submit that to the IRS. So in this case, you're authorizing Acme Tax Preparation Solutions to enter or generate your PIN. You should probably use a different PIN, but you can use any 5-digit combination you want as long as it's not all zeros. And then that would be the PIN that they use when they file your extension for your tax return. Or you can choose the second one where you enter your own PIN. Now you would check this box if you're entering your own PIN and your extension form is being filed using the practitioner PIN method. So in that case, your tax return preparer would complete part 3, which we'll get to in a moment. So you'll notice that each spouse will do their selection on their own, and below your selection, you'll sign it, you'll date it. Each spouse can choose their own option. So if John wanted to use the first option, but then Jane said, you know what, I'm going to enter my own PIN, that's perfectly acceptable. So either spouse can choose either one without regard to what the other spouse is selecting. However, each spouse is responsible for their own PIN or authorizing their tax return preparer to use their PIN. What they're not allowed to do is give permission to their spouse to enter the PIN on their behalf. And that's not allowed. So, you might get some pushback from your tax return your tax preparer if you try to do that, at least in front of them. In part 3, your tax return preparer would do this basically using their electronic filing ID number followed by their own PIN. So basically, if you enter your own PIN and then your tax return preparer is filing IRS Form 4868, which is the normal extension, then they would enter their own PIN down here. They would also sign this. Now, this tax form doesn't go anywhere. It's not submitted with your tax return, but your tax return preparer is required to keep this on file for future instances. If the IRS has a question, if the IRS never received your return, if there's a question about your extension, if anything comes up in the future, this is your tax return preparer's kind of evidence that you walk through the proper parts of the process. So on the back of the form are some instructions, notes. They don't go step by step into this, but they do talk about when and how to complete the form, situations in which you would complete it versus when you would not. This is really for the tax return preparer's guidance. And then it also breaks down what you're supposed to do as a taxpayer versus what your tax return preparer is supposed to do. So we kind of went over the taxpayer responsibilities. The one thing I kind of wanted to circle back to in part 2 is some of this fine print up here. So what you're allowing is your tax return preparer to send that form to the IRS and to receive either an acknowledgement or of the receipt of your tax return, or if the IRS sends any communication back, like why they rejected it, why they're not able to delay why there's a delay in processing the form, like any of that communication, this is an automatic approval for that. In addition, if you've entered your direct debit information, like you're paying taxes with your filing, then this is the authorization for the U.S. Treasury to initiate that funds withdrawal from your bank account that you've stated on your tax return. So this authorization, it stays in full force until you say otherwise, specifically for this return. So, there is guidance for tax return preparers. They're not supposed to send this form to the IRS unless the IRS asks them. They are required to confirm your identity. If this is your first time, they may ask you for copies of your picture ID. If they've known you for previous tax years, then then they don't need to ask that subsequently, as long as they know you personally. They are supposed to provide you a copy of your signed form and any changes to that signed form upon request. So a lot of people will automatically just include that in any of their any of these e-file authorizations. If there's one for your extension, if there's one for your tax return, they usually put that in the package. But if not, you can always ask for the most recent version of it, and they should give it to you. They're only allowed to use your PIN if you give them specific permission to use your PIN. They if they're not using the practitioner PIN method, then they must enter your date of birth and then some previous information from your prior year return. So they can either use your adjusted gross income or the PIN that you used from your previously filed tax return, and they're required to do that when they're not using the practitioner PIN method down here. That's their verification process. So, and then just for your knowledge, if your tax return preparer probably will use electronic signature documentation. Most people do. They are allowed to use a rubber stamp, a signature pen, or computer software. So there are certain things that they're allowed to do. This form kind of covers them in depth. So again, this is the tax form specifically for those extensions, either IRS Form 2350 or IRS Form 4868. And each of these e-file forms specifically tells what they are allowed to do. If it's not listed in the form instructions, then they're not allowed to do that on your behalf. So that's all we have for this article, for this video. We've written the article, which goes into a little bit more depth and kind of step by step. You can find that by clicking the link in the show notes or by going to our website. If you go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form 8878, you'll see the article that we just wrote. And we'll also put links to the forms, to articles that we've written about the forms mentioned in this video. If you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. And if you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our channel. And if you have any questions, comments, or if there's a topic you'd like me to discuss in the future, please feel free to let me know. I'd be more than happy to create a video to address a question that you may have. Thank you very much and have a great day.